on your Twitter, I see that you do absolutely fantastic threads, like about, the history of Nazis in Ukraine, the histories of Nazis in the CIA. What would you say, out of all the threads that you did, was the one where you were researching and doing, was the one that really touched your breath and was really hard for you to get your mind together and write this, and just made you feel like really just disturbed by the crimes that the United States government has and the military industrial complex has had? The one you thought, what on earth is the United States doing?
There's so many crimes. Where do I begin? I tell you what, I'm going to retweet my favorite right now so that everybody can find it. If you go to my Twitter, it's at Real Lori Spencer on Twitter, and it should be the first tweet that you see. It's about declassified CIA documents tracing the whole history of the CIA's involvement in Ukraine from the Second World War until the end of the Cold War. These are documents that were declassified in 1998, and it took several years for the documents to filter out. The National Archives had to go through them and copy them, digitize them, upload them. So the public didn't really get to see a lot of this until 2004, 2005. And back then, most Americans weren't paying attention to Ukraine. It wasn't on our radar. So the story just kind of got buried. Nobody was talking about it. Journalists really weren't writing about the revelations in these documents. To be honest with you, I didn't find these documents specific to Ukraine. I'd been going through the documents about the German Nazi war criminals that we brought over after World War II. If you read The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot, it's about Alan Dulles recruiting all these Nazis, protecting them from prosecution at Nuremberg and bringing them into the United States and Canada and getting them into South America and protecting them and using them as CIA assets. But we only knew about the Germans. We didn't know about the Ukrainian Nazi war criminals, and no Ukrainians were prosecuted at Nuremberg, by the way. The Ukrainians were our friends, and they were useful to us in the Cold War, in the battle against the Soviet Union. And so we were arming and funding and training these Banderites, these Nazi Ukrainian nationalist groups like the OUN, the UPA, the OUNB, to be sort of a proxy army to do guerrilla warfare against the Soviet Union. And there were many different cryptonyms and code names for these projects. If you want to go look them up and learn more about it yourself, you can find these documents in the National Archives, also on the CIA's website. And I have links to that in my Twitter thread. I have copies of some relevant documents, and there are thousands and thousands of pages. It'll keep you busy for a while, but it's really interesting reading. You can read about Project Aerodynamic, which was also known as Project Cartel, Androgen, AE Carthage. That was from like 1949 to 1970, and then was reclassified under project name QR Dynamic and QR Plum, and those were in operation until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Now, at that point, supposedly, they didn't do that stuff anymore. There wouldn't be any need to, right? We're friends with Russia now? Not really. Those things are still going on, and we know now that those are the origins of the current conflict over there in Ukraine. So, in other words, the CIA never really stopped meddling and using these Ukrainian nationalists in Ukraine, and in fact, put them into power in the Maidan coup in 2014. These are the same people. These are the descendants of the Ukrainian resistance network. The freedom fighters is what they were called by the CIA. And many of those Ukrainian nationalist leaders, guys like Mykola Lebed, were brought into the United States, even though he had a conviction for murder and war crimes. Alan Dulles made a personal request to the Immigration Services, INS here, to look the other way. It's supposed to be illegal for Nazi war criminals to come to the United States. There was a law against it. So the INS had to be convinced to look the other way, and they did. And they let Mykola Lebed into the country, where he ran a publishing firm called Prologue Publishing in New York for many years, decades, publishing anti-Soviet, anti-communist propaganda, pro-Ukrainian
Yep,
propaganda.
because one thing I saw, I remember one video you said, if there's anything more than there's anything more than a Nazi hates than a Jew, it's economist. They
That's
don't like
exactly right.
economists at all. They don't, they killed a lot of economists. And let's not forget Operation Paperclip, how NASA and the CIA had Nazis working along them, absolutely disturbing. When I was reading that, I was like, wow, hearing the news about that, like the fact that the neo-Nazis like creating, like helping be in the CIA and just having so much influence on Western culture, and like, it's disturbing. To
And
see
we only
the
found
United
out,
States.
so it's just amazing. We only found out about it, and it was confirmed in these documents, like 60 years after the war.
I know, right? And
After
I
we
just
fought the
and
Nazis?
I know, just seeing like all of the taxpayers' money that should be being used, for healthcare or social development or industries, especially in the West, whether it's in New Zealand, Australia, UK, France, Spain, Belgium, or United States. And then it's funny because it's also funny, how people like AOC and Biden say they're for black people and they care about Jews, but yet they're giving money to these far right, groups like the Azak Battalion or ISIS or, Al Qaeda, who hate Jews. And that, like, if you think about it, they're in no position to lecture us about all this crap and all that, especially when they're giving these people money. And it's funny, how Black Lives Matter, pretty much care about black people, but yet they're giving money towards these people. It's just, the whole thing is just insane,
Welsh, they love black people so much that they just indicted 5 members of a socialist black revolutionary group called the Uhuru Movement here in the United States.
Yep,
last week.
I
That's how much
saw
they
that.
love
Absolutely
black
ridiculous.
people.
So could you clarify that for me? Because I heard it was those 5 people. I heard apparently they were saying that they were being accused of Russian propagandists, or something like that, which is a load of rubbish, and it's absolutely nonsense. I mean,
yes, literally, that's what they are being accused of, among other things. When you read the indictment, it's shocking. It's truly, truly shocking when you see what they're actually being accused of. One is that this group was conspiring to sow discord. That's a quote. Conspiring to sow discord. That's not a crime. That's freedom of speech. Isn't every protest kind of sowing discord? Donald Trump, isn't that what he did so well? Was, sowing discord? And, also they've been accused of spreading Russian propaganda. That's what the DOJ indictment said.
Which is absolutely nonsense. I think it's, I was watching Kim, what's her name? The girl that you went on, Kim.
Kim Iverson.
Her show, Kim. Who absolutely brilliant journalist. I think she's fantastic. And she was mentioning that this is very scary because basically if you're someone who is even friends of a Russian or even, doesn't have anything to do with politics, you could be, hunted down and killed. It's like the Biden administration has like this authoritarian, because especially like when Tulsi Gabbard, left the Democratic Party and she saw, how the Democratic Party were, pretty much criticizing, and going after, their opposites, especially when she brings up a point like that. Going back to the Kim thing, she also brought up another video called apparently Catholics are being targeted by the Biden administration. And it's funny how the Biden administration say they're for freedom of speech and freedom of right, but yet going after opposite leaders.
Biden's
just
a Catholic. Biden's supposed to be a Catholic. What?
I know. It's absolutely outrageous, isn't it? And, Biden says he's for freedom of speech and he's for Christianity, but he's going after them. It's just absolutely nonsense.
And then did you see his big presidential campaign announcement video today that they snuck out at like 5:00 in the damn morning? It's like, why? Why did you put that out at 5:00 in the morning when everybody's asleep? And that's when they launched this video. But when you watch the video, it's infuriating, because he's gaslighting us about freedom. It's like he's all about freedom. Joe Biden is now Mr. Freedom. This guy has done more to destroy our freedoms during his presidency than any president since George Bush. Might even be worse than George Bush, because when you look at this Restrict Act that is winding its way through Congress,
Yep,
I mean, this
it's
is
and you know
scarier than the Patriot
it's
Act.
funny because it's not, you know, a TikTok bill. The TikTok bill, it's not to ban TikTok. It's a
Right.
Restriction Act, and the Restriction Act is going to give the government, you know, more control and allow it to spy on us. Even though the government of the United States already has this ability, you know, to access our credit cards, access this, access that, because they already have that, especially, you know, with spy not where, and they probably could be spying on us right now. They could be spying on a lot of things, which they already had that ability to do that for a long time. I
Thanks to the
just think
Patriot Act.
that this the thing that, you know, the United States, the thing that, you know, that people are not speaking about the Restriction Act, and they're more worried about drama on Twitter or this and that, or Tucker Carlson getting fired from Fox News. There should be a mass protest against the Restriction Act, because this is just, you know, like a New World Order policy that is just trying to push Agenda 30 down people's throats, and it's absolutely scary, because if this if this Restriction Act does go through, it's just going to give the government, you know, control over like Rumble and all that, and that's
They
not,
can lock you up for 20 years if they don't like what you do on the internet, literally. And also the Uhuru movement, when you look at that DOJ indictment, the language is so broad that you could fly a 767 through it. It could be applied so, you know, just this is horrible. And this guy's lecturing me about freedom. Freedom. He's the guy who gave us vaccine mandates, who forced us to take under, you know, coercion of losing our jobs, of not being able to participate in society. Don't forget, that was Joe Biden. Now, how is that freedom? This guy is the anti-freedom president, and he sits up there in that video today and talks about freedom. Just made me so angry.
You know,
Seriously.
one thread I was reading from you was Operation Unthinkable, and it was like in the 1950s how Winston Churchill like actually wanted to do a plan with the United States and wanted to bomb Soviet Union. How crazy is that? Do you want to like clarify like Operation Unthinkable, what it is about, and what other facts people should know about it?
Oh, I'd be delighted. I love talking about Operation Unthinkable. In fact, let me find that thread. I'll retweet it. So if you're following along on Twitter, you can read the documents yourself. It's absolutely amazing. Now, here's the story. This will blow your mind if you haven't heard it before. Before World War II was over, remember Franklin Roosevelt passed away on April 12th, 1945. Less than 2 weeks later, our ally, Winston Churchill in England, has this idea, because by then the writing was on the wall. Nazi Germany was being defeated. It was just a matter of time before surrender and the war would be over. Now, Churchill had this bright idea. Hey, isn't the bigger enemy communism? Let's go get the Soviets now. I mean, we've already got the American troops over here on the continent. Let's put them to work, and let's use repurposed Nazi prisoners of war. Put those guys back on the battlefield with British troops, French troops, Allied troops, and we're all going to turn around and we're going to go invade Russia. You know, the same thing that Hitler had done just 4 years earlier in 1941 with Operation Barbarossa, the big invasion of the Soviet Union,
which is the biggest,
mistake.
you know, which is, you know, the biggest operation, you know, military thing, or the biggest military operation in human history.
That's right. And so Winston wanted to do it again, only this time we would be invading our ally. I mean, Russia was our ally in World War II. The Soviets were our allies. The Soviets did the vast majority of the fighting on the Eastern Front. They inflicted the most Nazi casualties, and they suffered the greatest losses. They lost some 27 million, I believe. Nobody paid a price in World War II like Russia did. And Winston Churchill then wants to go invade our ally. Oh, but it gets better. It gets better. We had just invented the atomic bomb. And Winston Churchill was trying to prevail on President Harry Truman to use a nuclear weapon against our ally, the Soviet Union. Just let that sink in for a moment.
Wow, that's absolutely disturbing, isn't it?
And and here's the really disturbing part, guys. We didn't even know about Operation Unthinkable. And there are reasons why it ultimately did not, go into operation. First of all, because it was insane. It was crazy. But there were also other reasons. One thing, we didn't have enough nukes. The nuke was a brand new thing, and we only had one, and we decided, or two, we were going to drop them on Japan instead. But originally, the plan was to drop them on Russia, which is what we didn't know until the year
To drop them on
1990.
Russia, wow.
Yeah,
I didn't.
our ally.
That is,
Yeah, it's crazy. I know it's crazy, and I don't expect you to believe me because it sounds so crazy. So just go to my Twitter. You'll see the tweet, and you can go down the thread. You can go to the British National Archives of the UK. You can see these documents for yourself. And here's the important part to remember. This was kept secret from the world until after the Soviet Union fell, because obviously the Soviets might be kind of angry if we had disclosed this. So they waited until the 90s. It was finally declassified, I think, in 1998 or 1999. So, yeah, these documents were kept secret from us until basically most of the veterans of that war were dead. Because can you imagine how angry you'd be if you fought in World War II against the Nazis? And then you find out stuff like this. I mean, our troops fought side by side with the Russians. We formed friendships forever with those Red Army soldiers, with those Soviets. There was a deep and lasting bond made on those battlefields on the Eastern Front. We were not about to turn around and go invade them, or worse, nuke them. And there was nothing left of Russia. There was nothing left of most of these Soviet cities. After years of fighting the Nazis, they were in rubble anyway. And we were going to
same with Western Europe. Western Europe was an absolute dire state at that time too. In the United States, they had every opportunity to rise up, but let's not forget, it wasn't, Winston Churchill who was the people controlling him. It was the Rothschild and Rockefellers and the bankers. It was the Greater Bank of London. Those are the guys pushing it down our throat. Those are the guys wanting to do the war, because the thing is, the United States never wanted to go into World War II. They only went into World War II because of an inside job that happened when Franklin Roosevelt knew that Pearl Harbor was going to happen, but he completely ignored it. And one of the reasons is, if you think about it, in World War II, the bankers and the elitists, they made so much money off these wars, whether it's been even if it's been the Iraqi war, the Libyan war, Syria war, or even, the wars that, they had, against like in Nicaragua or like Panama. It's just insane, so yeah.
That's right. And, Winston was always a warmonger. I'm not one of those people who thinks that Winston Churchill.
Oh, he is. He killed. He killed a lot of people in He killed a lot of people in India. What the British Army did, to a lot of people in India, what the United States did, to even before World War I and World War II, doing, the wars against the Spanish Empire, doing the wars against Fiji, doing the war they had against Fiji, against, the Spanish, against, the Native Americans, just absolutely messed up, all the things that they, the United States, if you think about it, the United States in history, a lot of people say that China and Russia, have been the biggest, warmongers in history. Well, that's far from the truth. If you think about it, the United States has been the biggest warmongering country in the world, but not because of the people. It's because of the military industrial complex, and it's because it has to do with the bankers and stuff that run the United States government. That's absolutely insane,
That's a fact. And let's be really glad that Winston Churchill lost the election in July of 1945, because Operation Unthinkable was supposed to go operational on July 1st, 1945. The plans were drawn up by his top military staff. They were ready to go. And if it wasn't for Winston losing that election, we probably would have been in World War III right after World War II.
Laurie, I just want to try and find something. Just give me a minute. Just keep speaking about the Operation Unthinkable. I just wanted to bring something up. Hang on, sorry. Just keep talking.
Sure. I can talk a lot about Operation Unthinkable because it's a subject of endless fascination for me. And what fascinates me most is that even now, 25 years after the documents were declassified, most people don't know about it. In fact, I was even talking to Scott Ritter recently and interviewing Scott Ritter. And, he's a military historian. I figured he'd know about this one, but I stumped him. It's hard to stump Scott Ritter, And I asked him, I said, what do you know about
Wow.
Operation Unthinkable? And he says, what? So I start telling him the story. And he's like, what? That's crazy. I said, I know. I know it's crazy, but it was real. And it almost happened. And he was like, no, that can't be right. So I sent him all the documents and he looked and he was like, holy shit, it's true. Pretty amazing. And when you read these documents about Operation Unthinkable, the arrogance and the hubris of the British in really thinking that they had some chance of defeating the Soviets. Are you kidding me? I mean, the Soviets had just kicked the Nazis' asses all the way back to Berlin. And we thought that we were going to defeat them. And yet nobody dared to tell Winston that this was a really bad idea. Like no one dared say, but Winston, the Soviets are our allies. And the stated objective, and I'm quoting here from the documents, was, quote, to impose upon Russia the will of the United States and the British Empire. The goal was, quote, the elimination of Russia as a country. Does any of this sound familiar? Like, are we doing this now? I'll read you some more. A quick success might induce the Russians to submit to our will, at least for the time being, but it might not, the planning document says. That is for the Russians to decide. If they want total war, they are in a position to have it. Wait, what? Total war? Didn't we just finish a world war that devastated most of Europe and we still haven't finished that other war over in the Pacific yet? But Churchill was obsessed at that point with finishing off Russia. The country that had saved Great Britain from the Nazis? Yeah, Russia, that Russia. And you can just imagine Winston, can't you? Like deep in his cups, drunk one night, obsessing over how he's going to destroy Stalin. He's going to destroy the Soviets. And now there's nobody to stop him because FDR just died 2 weeks earlier. Because if FDR had been alive, he would have never let that happen. He had a strong alliance with Joseph Stalin. You might even say a friendship of sorts with Stalin. Those two had great respect for one another. And he was not about to let the United States get involved with an invasion of Russia. But FDR was gone. And now Harry Truman was in power. And Truman actually gave this plan some pretty serious consideration. Now, some of his top generals thought it was nuts. I mean, like General Dwight Eisenhower said it was madness. General Patton was all for it, As Patton famously said, we'd been fighting the wrong enemy all along in World War II. He was staunchly anti-communist, and he wanted to go finish off Russia. So, and before you say that Operation Unthinkable could never happen, I'm going to read to you point 8 of the plan from these original documents. It says,
Sure. Go ahead.
to achieve the decisive defeat of Russia in a total war would require, in particular, the mobilization of manpower to counteract their present enormous manpower resources. This is a very long-term project and would involve the deployment in Europe of a large population of the vast resources of the United States, the re-equipment and reorganization of German manpower, the Nazis, and of all the Western allies. That, my friend, is precisely what is happening right now in 2023. Can you believe that? Just wow. So this plan has literally been on paper since 1945. What we're doing right now. Are you still there, Welsh? Can you hear me? I think Welsh may be gone. Is it just me?
A minute.
Oh, there you are.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you now.
Hello. Sorry about that.
Hello.
I was just looking at something. Give me a second, Laura. I'll be right back. Sorry, just looking for this thing. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Yeah. Is that all good? Can you hear me all good? Is it fine?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. So I found this interesting thing. This is called United States involvement since World War II. I couldn't actually find the previous list before. So do you want to tell you all the involvements they've had since World War II?
Well, I kind of know them, but please, yeah, read the list. Read the list.
Okay, so you have China from 1945 to 1946, Syria 1949, Korea from 1950 to 1953, China from 1950 to 1953, Iran 1953, Guatemala 1954, Tibet 1955 to the 1970s, which was obviously the CIA coup to pretty much get Tibetans to overthrow the Chinese government because they were Tibetan fighters. Indonesia in 1958, Cuba from 1959, the Democratic Republic of Congo 1960 to 1965, Dominican Republic 1961, Vietnam 1961 to 1973, which we all.
Uh-oh, I think we lost Welsh. Welsh, are you muted?
Sorry about that. I'm not going to read all of it, but it's a long list. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? This might
That's
actually
better.
work. This might be better. So yeah, you've got Guatemala 1964. You've got Laos 1964 to 1973. Dominican Republic from 1965 to 1966. Indonesia to 1965. You've got Peru 1965. Greece 1967. Guatemala 1976 to 1969. Cambodia 1969 to 1970. You can still hear me, right, Laurie?
Yeah, all good.
Chile 1970 to 1965, you got Argentina 1976, and then you got Angola 1976 to 1992, Turkey 1980, Poland 1980 to 1981. Wow, I never knew the United States went after Poland in the 1980s. El Salvador from 1981 to 1992, which was a CIA, Q color revolution. Nicaragua, 1981 to 1990. Cambodia again, 1980 to 1995. I think that's something to do with economists, killing people or something. Grenada, 1983.
Oh, we lost you again.
Hear me? It's all good? Sorry.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out.
Is it all good?
Better
Is
now.
that all good? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Keep going. It's a long list.
Then,
keep going.
And then you got Iran, then you got obviously Haiti 1991, then you got the Panama War, which happened. You got actually the Philippines in 1989, which is the second time the United States invaded the Philippines, especially from the Spanish Civil War. That the Spanish Civil War, had against, the Philippines in the 18th century, the 19th century. Then you got Kuwait in 1991, then you got Somalia in 1992 to 1994, then you got Iraq from 1992 to 1996, then you got Bosnia from 1995, then you got Iraq, 1998, Sudan 1998, Afghanistan 1998. Obviously the Afghanistan war went on for 20 years. I don't know why it says that. Then you got Yugoslavia 1999. Then you got Iraq 2002 to 2003. Then Yemen 2002, which is currently happening right now still. Then you've got Haiti 2004, but even though there's also actually a coup going on in Haiti right now, you got Somalia 2006 2007. You got Iran, which is still happening, which the United States is still trying to do. Then you got.
It's such a long list, he can't get through it. We lost you, Welsh. You cut out again.
Sorry about that. I'm just really passionate, to say this list. Can you hear me?
Yes, keep going.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the list. And then obviously you've got and then you got Brazil 2016, Bolivia 2019, Venezuela 2019, something 2020, Iraq 2020, Somalia 2020, Afghanistan 2020, Ukraine 2014, and the new Nord Stream pipelines 2022. And let's not forget Ethiopia and Sudan 2023.
Man, that's a long, long list. We just can't mind our own business, And most of those wars that or police actions or whatever the hell you want to call them, most of them were done under the guise, at least in the 20th century, of fighting communism. Communism was the
Hmm.
enemy and the excuse for us to involve ourselves in the business of other countries and overthrow regimes and do all of these things that we did. And Tyler in our chat room just asked a great question. He said, why do they hate Russia so much? That's the question. And probably the best answer that I could give, just from a historical perspective, is we had good relations with Russia up until 1917, when the October Revolution happened and the Bolsheviks came to power. And from that date forward, the United States positioned ourselves as an enemy of Russia, of the Soviet Union, and of all communist movements and communist nations around the world.
Absolutely.
That was the
That is very true.
justification for all those years of war. And then in the 21st century, of course, the focus shifted to terrorism because the Cold War had ended in 1991. We needed a new boogeyman. We needed a new enemy, a reason to justify all this military spending and these endless wars. And so the new focus after 9/11 became terrorism instead of communism. But after 20 years of that, that's also worn thin, that they need something new. And so they haven't got anything new. And what are they doing? They're going back to the old Cold War stuff. They've started a new Cold War, and they're bringing back McCarthyism, and they're bringing, as we just saw with the indictment of the Uhuru movement last week. If that's not McCarthyism, I don't know what is. You see all this anti-communist Cold War kind of rhetoric now, again, about China, about North Korea. And even though Russia hasn't been communist in some 30 years,
it isn't. It's like a mixed economy. It is a communist in a way, but it's also very capitalist. So it's actually a federation democracy. Russia is now.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And yet there's still a lot of pro-communist sentiment in the old former Soviet Union. To this day, 70% of Russians think that Joseph Stalin was the greatest leader they ever had. And almost 60% of Russians say they'd like to go back to the Soviet Union. The second largest party in Russian politics is still the Communist Party. Communism didn't die just because the regime changed back in 1991. Still a lot of communists in the Soviet Union, but no, the current government that's in control and has been in control ever since is certainly not a communist government. But most Americans don't know the difference. Joe Blow out there, you ask them about Russia, and he's like, "Oh, they're communists over there in Russia." They still, they grew up during the Cold War, and they were deeply indoctrinated, deeply brainwashed, with a lot of, frankly, malarkey. I mean, I'm a historian. I study primary documents, and so much of what we were taught, and I'm a Cold War kid. I went to school during the Cold War. I was indoctrinated too against communism. I was taught to fear Russia and to be afraid of China and to be afraid of the communists. They were the menace. They were going to come get you. There were Reds under the bed, I was taught to believe all that. And it wasn't until many, many, many years later in my life that I started going back and we also had disclosures like the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act that we were talking about at the start of the show, where I started to learn the real truth of what we did, and that we crawled into bed with like actual Nazis, all in the name of fighting communism. That's what the whole thing was about. That's why we protected those Nazis and brought them over here, and why we armed and funded and trained guerrilla war groups in the Ukraine. These Ukrainian nationalists from 1945 on we had this, I would call it communism derangement syndrome. It's a kind of mental illness, we've got to destroy Russia. And we still have that unfortunate brain worm in the American psyche. It's terribly unfortunate. Look how many people have died as a result of our anti-communist foreign policy. And I'm not
absolutely.
I'm just telling you. I'm telling you as a historian.
Laurie, Do you think the United States needed to drop the nuclear bomb on Japan? Because I remember I watched a speech by Nelson Mandela where he was saying that Japan was pretty much already defeated at that time in 1945, at that time when the nuclear bomb was about to be dropped. Do you think they needed to drop the bomb on Japan? And do you think, for the fact that the United States dropped the bomb on the Japanese, which was an absolute crime against humanity and was disgusting, and it just caused so much damage to the country of Japan and Hiroshima and Yamazaki, all those areas, and there's still people feeling the effects of the radiation to that day.
Yes.
Do you think that itself, when you look at a moment like that, and especially when you look at that, it also proves that it's funny because the United States are the only country in the world to ever drop the nuclear bomb. Do you think the United States needed to drop a nuclear bomb or no?
We not only did it once,
twice. Sorry, my apology. Twice.
Yeah, we did that twice. It's an atrocity, and we didn't need to do it. It was completely unnecessary. We pretty much had Japan's pledge of surrender at that point. It was unnecessary militarily, and they were basically testing out their new toy, this nuclear toy that they were so proud of, right? And they have to test it out somewhere. And like I just said, the original idea was to test it out on Russia. And many believe, and I think they are probably correct, that when we dropped those bombs, it wasn't strategically necessary to win the war in Japan, but it was a warning to Russia, to the entire world. Don't mess with us. In a recent speech, Putin compared the United States, NATO, but especially the United States, to a global mafia organization, like a mafia family. And if NATO is the mob, the United States is the godfather. I think that's probably pretty correct. I don't think he's wrong. Do you?
That's not wrong at all. And also comes to the fact, that the District of Columbia in Washington is the military capital of the world, London is the financial capital of the world, and the Vatican is the spiritual capital of the world, and they're all controlled by the WEF, they're all controlled by BlackRock, the elitists. Those are the true enemies. It's not the Russians, it's not the Chinese who are the enemies, it's them. It's not even the United States people, it's them. Do
you hear a cat purring? I have a cat up here in my studio right now, and he's his name is John. Okay, I'm a Kennedy fan, right? So I've got the Kennedy cats. I got 3 cats. I got Mama Cat, who's Jacqueline, right? And then she's got twin babies, and they're a boy and a girl, fraternal twins. Solid black, both of them. They identical in every way. One's a girl, one's a boy. The girl is Caroline, and of course,
oh, that's so lovely.
John.
What type of cats are they, Lori?
They're like Bombay, American short hair. Those kind of short-haired, solid black cats. They're really, really sweet-natured, good kids, and that's why I let them hang out in my studio with me when I'm on the air. But they just jump right up and make themselves at home and get right on the mic or the camera. Sometimes, if you watch me on Maverick News, it does happen sometimes. Where the cat just jumps up there and says, "Hello, world! I'm on the camera. Hi." So.
I wish I was able to see them. That would have been cool.
I know what he's doing. He's telling me, "Hey, Mom, you've been talking too long. It's time to get off that thing and come pay attention to me." So I guess we're done, aren't we? Has it been about done with the show?
We could someone also just brought up another thing here. Says the scene, Tyler, your friend, says the scene in John Herschel's book Shama when he walks over to a ditch filled with people with whose eyeballs had melted out down their faces would stick will haunt me forever. My government did that. That's very true.
God,
that's very true.
I love that Tyler knows that book. I'm a big fan of John Hersey. And by the way, did you know that Hersey was good friends with JFK?
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, they'd known each other since college, I believe. And then after Kennedy was almost killed on the PT-109 during World War II out in the Solomon Islands, John Hersey was the guy who wrote the story and told the world the story. I think it was in Reader's Digest or one of those magazines. But yeah, Hersey told the story of the PT-109 of his old friend Jack Kennedy.
Wow, that's very interesting. So, Laurie, do you want to finish up now?
Sure, yeah. I should probably call it a night.
Yeah. So, before we go, Laurie, is there anything else you would like to say?
Well, this has been a wonderful interview. Thank you. Thank you for hosting me on your platform on YouTube. Since my channel is now banned from YouTube, at least I have a place to speak. So thank you for that. And thank you for asking such really good questions. You ask good questions, Welsh. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Where can people find you?
Well, I was going to plug my YouTube channel, but I'm kind of off the air right now. I mean, you can see my old videos on YouTube. I just can't upload any new content. I do have a Rumble channel, and I'm definitely encouraging people to follow me on Rumble instead. Why watch censorship tube when you have an alternative? And if you really support free speech, please subscribe to my channel on Rumble. It's just Laurie Spencer. And our main channel is Maverick News, News. And we're on every night. I'm not on the show every night. I'm usually behind the scenes working, but I come on the show a couple times a week. It's Maverick News. And it's a really good news program. Your daily news, 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 7 days a week. You can find us on YouTube for now. They haven't banned that channel yet, but they're probably going to pretty soon. And we're also on Rumble. And you can find me on Twitter at Real Laurie Spencer. So if you were curious to find out more about any of the topics, the historical topics we discussed tonight, you can find more info there on my Twitter or on my blog. And all the links are there on Twitter and YouTube. So
thank you for coming on, Laurie. It was a pleasure having you.
thanks,
and I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic Podcast, episode 108 today. Please go and subscribe to Laurie's YouTube channel and her Rumble. Give her all the support she needs. It's disgraceful that she was suspended from YouTube. I really wish the censorship would stop, because as a person who had his main YouTube channel taken down a few months, and the fact that they've had to make a backup channel and a Rumble for it is very annoying. Please, everybody, fight the censorship. It shouldn't be allowed. Freedom of speech is one of the most important things in human history, because without it, we would be nothing but sheep for slaughter. So please, everybody, go and support Laurie's work. She does fantastic Twitter threads on exposing the CIA's connections with Nazis and also war history that you'll never find out from the mainstream media. Give her a like and subscribe. And thank you for everybody for joining this podcast. Take care, everybody. God bless you all. Stay safe. Never give up. Bye.